Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thanks for being here for the third annual Gather Conversations to Inspire event hosted by Women in Philanthropy in partnership with University Advancement. My name is Caitlin Carlson, and I have the privilege of supporting the Women in Philanthropy donor community as part of my role in donor relations and stewardship. And we're thrilled you've joined us to talk with some of the exceptional leaders in our CSU community, and I want to express my gratitude for the time and effort our presenters and panelists have put into preparing for today. I'd also like to acknowledge a special guest, Derek Dixon, our new Vice President for University Advancement. And even though Derek will officially start in his role on May 1st, he's made time to be here, which is incredible. And I'm sure he's anxious to meet and talk with a lot of you. So if you have an opportunity to say hello, I'm sure Derek would love to chat. Today I have the honor of serving as our MC of sorts. So before we go any further, it's important that we pause for our land acknowledgement. The acknowledgement is a way of offering respect to traditional Indigenous citizens, both those who have come before and those currently living here, correcting the practice of erasing Indigenous peoples' history and recognizing that Indigenous peoples are still a vital part of our country's lands and future.
Colorado State University acknowledges with respect that the land we are on today is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and peoples.
This was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for numerous other Native nations.
We recognize the Indigenous peoples as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it.
As these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, the ties nations have to their traditional homelands are renewed and reaffirmed.
CSU is a land-grant institution, and we accept that our mission must encompass access to education and inclusion.
And significantly, that our founding came at a dire cost to Native nations and peoples whose land this university was built upon.
This acknowledgement is the education and inclusion we must practice in recognizing our institutional history, responsibility, and commitment.
Thank you. Another bit of housekeeping, we'll have short breaks between each of our sessions for you to refill coffee or use the restroom, and the refreshments will be replenished throughout the morning. Our hope is that this is an opportunity for conversation and dialogue among us all, and our presenters and panelists have included time for your questions as well. We encourage you to participate in the Q&A portions of the sessions as you are comfortable. I see many faces, familiar faces with us, and also some new faces. So for those who may not be as familiar with Women in Philanthropy, I want to share a few words about our mission and how it is that we've come to be here today. Women in Philanthropy connects and empowers our community to elevate women and philanthropy at CSU. We recognize the power of women and strive to connect them with their passions so that through philanthropy, the world's biggest challenges are solved. Put simply, we are a community of donors who believe in CSU, who know that there are brilliant, talented, capable women and men doing world-changing work right here. With the proper platform, we know they'll inspire you with their expertise and passion and show us all how we too can make a difference. Speaking of, we are incredibly fortunate to have another very special guest share a few more words of welcome and officially kick things off. It is my distinct honor to introduce the 16th President of Colorado State University, President Amy Parsons.
Thank you, Caitlin. Well, good morning. What a beautiful event this is. It's really an honor to be among so many of our CSU women and men this morning. I've always really admired the women leadership that we have at Colorado State University. Our faculty and our staff, our students, our amazing female athletes that we have at CSU, our leaders, our rock star CSU researchers. It's always been really a point of pride at CSU and the community that we've built among so many women here across the generations, and our deans and vice presidents. I see you here. We've got just so many amazing women at CSU. And when I came back to CSU, I wouldn't say that I was surprised, but I was really pleased to find just how many women leaders we have out in our community, from our mayor, city manager, our foundation, our chamber of commerce, women across our region leading so many of our amazing institutions, our companies and our nonprofits and our museums. It's really remarkable to see. And I think that great culture of support for women is really led by Colorado State University right here. So, there's nothing more powerful than a committed, passionate group of women. And that's really why we're here this morning and what founded this group and this event. Women in Philanthropy was formed to help make our university the best place for women to work and learn, live, and to give. Thanks to the personal investment and strategic guidance of a small group of volunteers led by Paula Edwards and Nancy Richardson, this community came to life in 2018. Today's event, Gather, is in its third year, and it's an extension of Women in Philanthropy's mission to connect and empower our community to elevate women in philanthropy at CSU. This year's presenters and panelists will share their lives and their professional journeys. They'll discuss how they found belonging and accomplished a lot in industries where women have been traditionally underrepresented. It's my honor to introduce our first speaker, our keynote speaker, Shelly Swanback. Shelly is a digital transformer, board member, coach, and collaborator, as well as a dedicated mother and wife. She's the president of TTEC and chief executive officer of TTEC Engage. TTEC is one of the largest customer experience technology and services innovators. TTEC is globally recognized for supplying its customers with valuable end-to-end digital CX solutions. Shelly has more than 30 years of experience establishing and scaling innovative businesses using digital, analytics, strategic counseling, and technology-enabled services. Most notably, she launched and built Accenture Digital into a global digital transformation powerhouse with more than $20 billion in annual revenue in just 7 years. That's amazing. Shelly has achieved all of this in an industry where the percentage of women in leadership roles is trending down and has fallen to 28%. Shelly is an alumna who graduated from CSU's College of Business with a BS in Finance and Computer Information Systems. She lives in Arvada with Steve, her husband of 28 years, and they both enjoy the mountains, international adventures, and frequent visits with their college-age children. Let's give Shelly a warm welcome to this gathering this morning.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I don't know if this is on. Okay, great. Well, it's great to be here. It's always fun to come back to campus. My husband actually graduated from CSU as well. My kids decided they needed to go out of state, so they're not here, so I don't have as many opportunities to come back to campus, but it's always just great to be here. And, when I was preparing my remarks for this morning, I was just thinking of all the great memories that I have being here for 4 years. And I have to admit, I was also just wondering, what am I going to talk about that's going to be interesting to this diverse audience of people who are maybe just starting their career, in the middle of their career, maybe beyond their career, doing other things in life. So in the end, I decided to talk about how belonging and fortitude have really helped create my success and share what's become my personal leadership motto. So hopefully there will be a story or two that resonates or at least interesting for everybody. So maybe just first a little bit about my background. I grew up in a middle-income family, playing a lot of competitive sports, doing well in school, and I started working when I was about 15 years old. And I've always been a perfectionist, particularly about myself. Really proud to have it together, yet every day realizing what I could do better. I was never the best athlete, but I had a lot of fortitude when it came to sports. I worked really hard to make all the top teams in all of my sports, particularly in high school, and deliver strong individual contributions, but for me, the priority was always about improving the team's performance. And actually, my early learnings of leadership came from sports. And one of my most vivid memories is halftime at a varsity basketball game my senior year. My team was actually ready to quit the season and not go back out on the court and play the second half. And I was the team captain. So it was my responsibility to get us back out on the court and show ourselves and our school what we could do. But my team was deflated. Our coach had torn us down for so many years. And I kept thinking to myself, we're unbeatable in every other sport but basketball. And I've got to get this team back out on the court. And while I don't remember exactly the little speech I gave my team, the gist of it was just, we're a winning team in every sport, and we can do this, and we can be a winning team tonight. And I can still picture myself on my team walking back out on that basketball court to play a great second half. We didn't win the game, but we held our heads high. And it was one of my first lessons in leadership that I'll never forget. Then after high school, I decided to come to CSU. Why did I come to CSU? Candidly, I just felt like I belonged here, and indeed I really did. And when I came, I started as a math and a finance major, actually, and mostly just because I was good at math, and I wasn't sure what else I should study, what else I should do. And there's two pinnacle moments that happened for me my freshman year here at CSU. One is I broke my right wrist very badly the week before finals in my freshman year. And second was my intro to computer information systems and the relationship I built with my professor, Susan Athey, at the time. And you may say, like, why are those pinnacle moments for you? Well, because I had to take a honors calculus test left-handed. And it really made me realize I don't really actually enjoy this math that much. I'm not sure how I'm going to use this in a career. And secondly, Susan Athey just saying, you know, this computer information systems, this whole computer arena is natural for you. Why don't you change your major? And I have to say, it took me a minute to give myself permission to change my mind, to change my priorities. And this was a lesson for me because it's one of the most important decisions I made as a young adult, because it's what set me in motion for the career that I've been so fortunate to have over the last 30 years. So there I was at CSU, and before I knew it, it was time to start my career. And I was really, really excited to work, but I didn't really have a passion like so many of my fellow graduates. And it was a little bit concerning for me at the time because I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. So I chose to join Anderson Consulting, now called Accenture. Why? Because I felt like I belonged. I felt like I belonged. I was very excited about this idea of working for multiple clients, doing all this exciting, challenging, diverse work. And indeed, I did belong at Accenture. And my first assignment at Accenture progressed very fast. I was 9 months into Accenture, and I was asked to manage the team, of which I originally joined as the newbie. And it wasn't easy, I have to say, to suddenly be the boss for those whom yesterday I was their peers. And thankfully, my focus was still on team success, and my upbringing really instilled this sense of needing to earn my keep every single day. And these were my early days of servant leadership and finding my way as a leader. And it wasn't always easy finding my way, but I never really dwelled on the challenges. I just always assumed that I could overcome them. And it's only just a couple of years ago that I really took the time to reflect on my experiences and crystallize my personal leadership model, and that's what you see here today. I call it Be Real. And at the essence, my motto is really about being yourself, bringing your whole self to work into your daily life, and it's also about dealing with reality, tackling tough topics head on, but each letter also has a meaning, and so I'm going to share with you the motto and some stories to go along with it. So let me first start by sharing a few stories about tackling reality and tackling difficult topics head on. So I'll go back to my first day as the boss when I took over that programming team 9 months into Accenture. And this is going to sound like a silly example, but at the time it was so important and a little bit stressful, tackling this uncomfortable situation. There were 14 of us. We worked in an old closet with very, very little airflow. And there was a gentleman on our team who would take his shoes off in the middle of the day. It was disgusting. And no one would talk to him about it. So my first day as the boss of this new team, I decided I had to tackle this, not just because it was gross, but just as an opportunity to be the supervisor. And so I just faced it head on with grace, and there you go, problem solved. He kept his shoes on going forward. It was like my first accomplishment as a supervisor. And, I always tell my teams I prefer to deal with reality and that bad news doesn't usually get better with time. So it's best that we tackle the challenges as quickly as possible. It also turns out that the hard decisions are usually the ones that bring the most progress. So it's best to just embrace them head on and ask your teams to do the same thing. I tell my teams all the time, I love those juicy, difficult problems and difficult decisions, because it means we're doing something important. We're considering something important. I also believe very passionately in giving straightforward, honest, and constructive feedback to team members, even if it's uncomfortable. Candid performance feedback is one of the best gifts you can give someone, and in fact, it's the best gift you can give yourself. And not all bosses and supervisors and managers and leaders are comfortable giving candid feedback. So if you're not getting the feedback, my advice to you is ask for it. And if you ask for it in a way that you specifically ask for, what can you do different? How can you progress? And you ask your supervisor to be candid, you'll get great feedback. And you have to remember, no one's as motivated, is going to be motivated as managing your career as you can be yourself. So you have to take responsibility for getting the feedback that you need to be able to progress. Okay, so now let's move on to the letters. So the first letter is about being relevant. So the R stands for being relevant. And being relevant can mean so many different things depending on the situation. In my early years, I worried that to be relevant, I had to have a passion. I had to have expertise in a particular area, like so many of my colleagues did. Some were technology gurus, some were finance domain experts, some were the experts in supply chain. But what I learned was that I was relevant because I was a great manager, an outstanding team member, a great leader, and someone who could be counted on to tackle any situation. I didn't need that expertise that everyone else or passion as the others did. So here are two of my favorite examples with regards to relevance. And the first story is a client story. I was a senior manager at the time and so excited to be co-leading this huge project for a telecommunications client in Denver. It was one of the first times I had worked in Denver since I had been at Accenture, so I was very excited to have this in-town assignment. But I have to say the first client meeting was a complete shock. My Accenture co-lead was a tall German guy, and he and I went to the initial meeting with the CFO, but the CFO wouldn't even acknowledge I was in the room, let alone let me participate in the conversation. And I left feeling deflated and confused. I thought, why would the CFO assume I didn't have anything important to contribute to the discussion? What is going on? This was my first real experience with this. But rather than focusing on the meeting, I decided to just get to work and show the CFO and show his team how I could contribute, how I could be relevant. And fortunately, my early meetings with his controller went really well, and soon the controller and CFO realized, indeed, I was really relevant. Not just because of my knowledge, because I was the one running the team day to day, including their team members who were part of this big system implementation. And to this day, I can remember the first time that the CFO called me and asked me to see me one-on-one in his office. And I remembered how proud I was strutting to his office like, he wants to talk to me one-on-one. It was such a milestone because he wanted my personal perspective on a few issues. And from there, things progressed very well, and pretty soon, my tall German colleague actually rolled off the project, and I was officially in charge. And it was because the CFO and controller couldn't understand the relevance that he brought to the project. And this story isn't about me winning versus my colleague. I share it as an example of fortitude and just a recognition that sometimes it takes people a little while to appreciate your relevance, but don't give up. The next story comes from later in my career. So I was well into my tenure as a managing director. I was a P&L leader, responsible for a big portfolio of clients in our communications, media, and technology industry group. And at the time, I was known as a great client person, a great salesperson, someone who could grow a business by leading teams to sell and deliver all the various practices at Accenture. And it was a tough time for me career-wise, but after turning around my business and through a series of very difficult client negotiations, a whole set of new growth strategies, I was actually asked to take on a new role, leading our Accenture technology practice across all of North America, across all of industries. And at the time, it was about a $10 billion worth of business at Accenture. But in so many ways, I was the left field choice. I was being asked to replace a leader who had very deep technology expertise and had been in the role for many, many years. And not only was I the left field choice because I wasn't a deep technologist, I was going to be the only woman, the first woman on our North America leadership team. And fortunately, I asked one of the best questions I've ever asked in my entire career. The Saturday morning when I was being asked, although not really being asked, being told this was going to be my new role at Accenture. My question was very simple. Why me? And essentially what I was asking my new boss was why he thought I was relevant for this new role. And what I learned is that he knew I wasn't a chief technology officer, and he didn't care. He chose me because of my great leadership skills, my ability to build teams who excelled at client relevance. He actually wanted me to create the next generation of our technology business and bring something different to the North America leadership team and to our clients. And it was so comforting for me and so empowering to know all I had to do is show up with my strengths. All I had to do was show up as I was. There was no reason for me to try and be a different kind of leader. So that's what the E stands for, is empowered. It's to feel empowered and to empower your teams. And for me, having a mindset of empowerment and just really assuming that I can tackle any opportunity or challenge and just taking on more responsibility without being asked has been a critical success factor for me in my career journey. So let me share a few of my favorite lessons about empowerment. About 4 years into my work at Accenture, I was asked to join a project as a programmer so that I could learn this system that we had developed and then be able to come back to Colorado and other states and help sell the system to additional clients. And to say I was taken aback to be asked to do a programming assignment when I had just spent a couple years supervising all of these technology teams would be an understatement. This was not something I was excited to do, but again, I wasn't being asked, I was being told, so there I went, off to Oklahoma City for this new assignment. Fortunately, I arrived feeling empowered to contribute to the project and the client in every way I could. So I worked really quickly. I got all my coding assignments done in the first couple of weeks. And along the way, I helped the project team tackle some familiar issues, challenges that I had faced before. And before I knew it, I was no longer programming, I was running the project. It was an opportunity for me to not just run a small team as part of a bigger project, but run the entire project. And so I share this because, while at the time it felt like a step back, this assignment actually gave me a foundation that was actually a career accelerator. Because what it allowed me to do is come back to Colorado and be the salesperson, sell a new opportunity, be the most senior person at Accenture on the client site every day. And I was only 5 years into my career. And so I share this because, sometimes there's something in every assignment. And I have found that, if you lean on your strengths and take those opportunities that feel like they're beneath you, lean on your strengths to do that job well and use it as an opportunity to learn new things, you can be amazed about how it can accelerate your progress on whatever journey you're on. And this, for me, is the essence of empowerment. Now let's talk about empowering teams. Not everyone has a mindset or assumes they're empowered to solve problems, to make decisions, to reach across the aisle to other teams, to be creative. And so as a leader, I think it's important to create an environment where everyone feels empowered, to contribute in every way they can, to bring their whole self to work. But part of this is explicitly telling teams what you're empowering them to do, how you want them to stretch, giving them confidence okay to make mistakes. And, oftentimes I have leaders coming to me today asking me to make a decision. And rather than make the decision, I let them know that the decision is actually their decision. It's part of their job, it's part of their responsibility, it's part of their remit. and that I'll back them up no matter what they decide. But if I were in their shoes, here's some things that I would be considering, here's some things that I would be thinking about, maybe here's some additional pieces of information I might want to know if it were my decision. But in fact, it's their decision, and give them confidence to make the decision and confidence to know that you'll back them up. I would say too often young leaders feel like they need to create a controlling environment because they want to know everything that's going on so they can kind of control the messaging to their peers and to their boss. This is a bad idea. This doesn't work very well. I actually believe in the opposite approach. You know, my advice to young managers and leaders is that you want to empower your team, so there's so many great things happening every day, there's no possible way you can keep track of them all. You don't need to know everything that's going on. You need to create a system that works. So there's so many great things going on, you can't possibly know them all. So empowerment's critical for sure, but it's also important that you take accountability. So of course that's what the A stands for. So first, a story about personal accountability. I was working a client in Kansas City, commuting back and forth every week. This was probably one of the most stressful projects in my 30-year career, partly because I was still pretty new with Accenture. It was probably 6 or so years into my career at Accenture. I was navigating a very, very difficult client situation. And I took extreme accountability for my work. In fact, I kind of became a robot. So I would come home on the weekends, and I just wasn't present. I wasn't present with Steve, who's now my husband, my family, my friends. And fortunately, I had a wake-up call when I arrived home Friday one night, and Steve just wasn't really very excited to see me. I think he felt like I was invading his space, and why was I there? Because I wasn't really present anyways. So it was a lesson for me about not just taking accountability for work, but taking personal accountability for being present with Steve and my family. And so I took accountability to roll off that project, knowing that it was going to, might create some career risk, but I decided it wasn't worth risking my relationship with Steve. So this was kind of my first lesson in setting some personal priorities and boundaries and really holding myself accountable for them. Next, another client story. I won't go into a lot of details, but let's just say it was a great lesson in doing the right things always, even when it's not popular, even when no one's looking, as they say. I was working at a client, and they were asking us to do some work in an area where I had a sense that they were just constantly pushing the boundaries in terms of what was right and wrong with regards to how they were contracting for this work, how they were accounting for it. So I actually chose to turn the work down, despite a lot of my Accenture partners just not understanding, why wouldn't I want this revenue? Why wouldn't I want to grow this part of my business? And later, some of these clients end up being criminally prosecuted for their actions. And this taught me to trust my instincts, to take accountability for doing what I believe is right, no matter what. I caught a lot of grief for walking away from that work at the time, but in my gut, I knew we shouldn't be involved. And I'm so thankful that I just trusted my instincts and stuck to what I knew was right. And as a leader, I think you have to take accountability, not just for yourself, but for your team. It's your responsibility to create an environment where people believe doing the right thing always, an environment where they take accountability for high performance, but also an environment where they feel comfortable they can raise up concerns without any fear of retribution. So my advice is always, your boss comes to you to inquire or complain about something, your team's done. Don't fall into the trap of blaming the team or blaming an individual. Just take accountability for yourself. It's your job as a manager, as a leader, to take accountability for your team. And then from there, go talk to your team. Seek first to understand, find out what's going on, help them create some action plans, and then give your boss some confidence that things are taken care of. But as a leader, you're accountable for yourself and you're accountable for your team. And creating an environment of blaming people is never an effective way to build a team or to build an organization. Okay, lastly, the L stands for always learning. Today's world, things change all the time. I love the saying, the pace of change will never be this slow again. And it's so true. So that means having a learning mindset personally, and creating one for your team is so important. These days, every organization has to be great at change, and navigating change requires an environment of constantly learning. And this takes effort. It's easy to say, and of course, we're in a learning environment here at the university. It's not always easy to do inside of organizations. And we all learn differently. I'm an experiential learner, so while I do plenty of reading, I really prefer a hands-on approach. And I really think that by me taking time to double-click on topics with team members or external parties is really, really been important for me in terms of maturing as a leader. I'm convinced that my approach to learning is what's made me a great listener in general. And this is what makes me very patient in conversations, to let them unfold, to ask team members to contribute in different ways on different topics. And this has been so helpful for me as I've built organizations, Accenture Digital, what I'm doing at TTEC now, and really assessing situations and making key decisions about company direction and about what the team's capable of doing. But let me share my favorite story about learning, and it comes from my role at Accenture, where I built Accenture Digital. And this was a big assignment for me. It was my first global assignment, and there was a lot on the shoulders of myself and the colleague who were asked to start this new business inside of Accenture. I remember our CEO saying to me, "The lives of 350,000 people and their families are counting on you to figure this out. And this is the future of Accenture." And I was a little bit stressed, candidly, because I didn't know a lot about digital. I knew I had to learn a lot about, nobody knew anything about digital back then. What is this going to be? We had to create this new business. And I was particularly stressed about understanding the European market because I had never been in a global role. I had, pretty young kids at the time, and this idea of traveling back and forth was a little bit stressful. So fortunately, empowerment and a little bit of creativity won the day for me. The day I took this role in February, and that May, the day after school was out, my family and I left for a 54-day family business trip. And everyone had a carry-on suitcase. Turns out that's actually all you need for 54 days. We traveled to 8 European countries and 17 cities in total. And this was the learning experience of a lifetime. Not just for me career-wise, but certainly for my family. And I remember being a little bit worried that people were going to think I was just taking a vacation, on company time. In fact, I was working very long days because I was starting with breakfast, having client meetings, team meetings, through the evenings, working on the weekends. And I remember being worried about that at the beginning. But in fact, the trip was such a success for Accenture and for our clients and for our teams that the next summer, I had our Asian team and the European teams that I hadn't visited that past summer asking me to come do the same thing. And so we took 2 more trips each summer, albeit a little bit shorter trips. And I would just say what seemed like a bit of a crazy idea at the beginning turned out to be a smashing success for everyone. And I can candidly say there's no way I could have learned what I did about the market dynamics, clients, the differences in Italy versus France versus Germany versus Spain, the difference in those European countries compared to running a North America business. There's no way I could have built Accenture Digital into a $20 billion business had I not done that. It's one of the best crazy ideas, I guess, of my career. And most recently, after leaving Accenture to take what I learned there and apply it into new industries, I've learned how important it is to take the time to really understand cultural norms and assumptions as you join new organizations. And it's actually easier to understand cultural norms because they're more obvious. You can sort of see them and sort of experience them. It's not so easy to understand what assumptions people or teams or organizations are making because they don't always say those things out loud. And I have lots of examples I can share. Maybe a simple one, a little bit boring, but will make the point is, actually pretty recently, I was working with the leaders on my team and we were going through the scorecard, the metrics that they're going to be measured on for the year. And was saying, here's all the quantifiable metrics, and I'm also going to, your performance rating is going to also be based on your leadership behaviors. And here's what I expect in terms of leadership behaviors. What I didn't realize is the assumptions that they all had was that was just a lot of talk, and nobody ever cared about leadership behaviors. Those weren't going to count. It was all just going to be about the scorecard. And then they started digging into the exact metrics on the scorecard because they were worried about precisely what the formula was going to be and exactly how this was all going to be calculated. And fortunately, I had a moment where I stopped to realize there was a whole different set of assumptions from me and from them. And it was a really important conversation to have so that we could all be on the same page about what it means to be successful as a leader on this team. I think one last idea about always being learning is I often get asked, how do you know what to learn about? Like, what should you spend your time on? And I guess I'd say a couple things. First off is you have micro-learning opportunities every single day. And if you just take a moment as you're in conversations and think about what am I learning here and how could I apply that to the future is a great thing. As a leader, the routine of just asking teams when they're doing readouts to you on different topics to say, hey, this is great. What have we learned since the last time we were together? What does that mean about how we might do things differently in the future? These learning routines actually is partly what creates a learning environment. And lastly, I always just tell everybody, learn about something you're interested in, whether it's directly applicable to the job you're doing now or just something that you're interested in. A topic that gets a lot of attention right now is artificial intelligence, and many people don't use that in their job day to day, but understanding what's happening with that technology and that innovation is quite interesting, but could be applicable for them in their job in the future. So that's it about be real, be yourself, be relevant, be empowered, be accountable, and always be learning. Let me just share one last story that kind of wraps this up in its entirety. So in the fall of 2001, I became a partner at Accenture and a mother, all within a 2-month period. And my husband, Steve, went from pursuing a software business idea to stay-at-home dad. So it was a pretty intense time for both of us. And as I returned to work from maternity leave, I was really faced with a big reality of needing to create a new client book of business in Denver, or needing to travel every single week and leave my newborn son, Andrew, and Steve at home. Or worse yet, maybe we're gonna have to move, which is not something that I wanted to do. So I decided to pursue a potential client who'd been on the verge of going bankrupt or being cash flow positive for 10 years. The company didn't like consultants, and I didn't actually know anyone there. But they were about 3 traffic lights from my house, and I felt like I had as good of a chance of making a client in business there as anywhere else. But all my Accenture colleagues told me I was putting my career in jeopardy, wasting my time. And I have to say the first few meetings were really, really rough. But I had no plan B. So as they say, when you got no plan B, somehow you figure out how to make plan A work. And work I did. I worked really hard to learn their business and figure out how I personally and how Accenture could be relevant to their priorities. And fortunately, I felt empowered to make it happen however I wanted to. And I certainly felt accountable to Steve and Andrew and myself to figure it out. It was definitely stressful. I remember when I got my first signed contract, and I was so relieved and proud for about 10 minutes. And then also stressed because I realized how long it took me to get that first contract, and it wasn't going to be enough to build a book of business and be able to raise Andrew and stay at home. Fortunately, I kept learning, and long story short, I grew this client to become one of Accenture's best clients across North America. Not just because it became big, but also because we were one of the client accounts to do things first at Accenture. We learned to do things differently, candidly, just because we had to. That was the only way to make it work. And best of all for me personally, I was able to work and live in Denver, raise my 2 kids, coach all of them in 3 sports, and really grow my impact as a leader at Accenture all at the same time. So everyone's formula is a little bit different. It's important to find what works for you and recognize that what works might change as your life circumstances change. And sometimes giving yourself permission to change your priorities is hard, but it's important to give yourself permission to change your mind, to change your formula, to adapt to your current realities. And I often get asked about my views on work-life balance or work-life integration, as lots of people like to call it. And I'll just share a point or two. This is obviously a very big topic, but when my kids were young, I worked really hard to separate work and life. I wanted my kids to feel like they were a priority. So I would actually sit in my car in the driveway finishing my conference calls before I'd open the garage. So as soon as I hit that garage door opener, I could kind of transition from work mode to mom mode. And I had a lot of neighbors ask me questions why I sat in my car on the phone, but it's what worked for me at the time. Most nights I was back at work after the kids went to bed, and this worked really, really well for many years. But then as Andrew and Lauren got a little bit older, and a little bit more curious about what I was doing, I decided to involve them in my work. This was when Andrew was kind of kindergarten, first grade. And so I started taking my kids to all my client dinners. And, Andrew was known to be sitting with me and all my clients having a nice steak dinner surrounded by adults with his little Thomas the Train set, playing with them at the table. And Lauren was always up for a fancy dinner. And we would talk about work and what I was doing, the challenges I was facing. We'd celebrate our successes together. Sometimes we were celebrating signing a big client deal. I remember when I said to Andrew that we just signed a $100 million client deal, and his eyes got really big, and I had to let him know that it was the $100 million was for Accenture, not for us. And we definitely celebrated every one of my promotions as a family promotion. I used to joke that when Andrew was really young, he thought I worked at a restaurant. He just didn't know which one, because going to work with me was going to a nice dinner. And I know that Lauren was convinced that, part of the reason, I earned one of my biggest promotions at the time was because she was quiet in the car when I was on phone calls. But that's all it took for them to feel involved. And what I learned is that gave my work purpose and meaning for them. And so rather than being angry or upset with me if I, had to work late or wasn't around at a certain time, they were proud of me. And they felt involved in what I was doing. They understood the purpose. While I've spent most of my 30-year career working with clients, peers, bosses who were men, I decided many years ago that I just had to lead in ways that were authentic to me. At the time, I didn't have this motto of be real, but I believed in small things like saying please and saying thank you. And I never felt like I wanted to be that smartest person in the room or the one that had to fill the room with all my ideas. I really preferred to take some extra time and listen, to consider multiple viewpoints, and I always saw my job as one to make the team performance stronger. And one of my most vivid memories of choosing to do things differently is from my very first days of taking on that role leading the technology practice across North America when I was the only woman on the North America team. And I knew I was a different leader than the team was used to. I also knew that I was that left field candidate. I knew that being the only woman on the leadership team would be challenging, and I knew that a lot of my direct reports didn't think I was qualified for the job. But I decided I was just going to lean into who I was. So I brought my team together for our first leadership meeting, and we had a working lunch. And I gave each person a gift, a bag, with a set of personalized stationery with their name on it. And I said, we're going to have a working lunch, and I asked each of them to use the stationery. They had 20 cards each, and all they had to do was write a thank you, write a congratulations, reconnect with somebody on their team, a peer or a colleague, and all they had to do is use up their stationery through that working lunch. And it was a huge risk for me. And I remember the first 15 minutes of silence, them all kind of looking around like, are we seriously doing this? Like, are you writing your cards? Do I have to write my cards? And then about 15 minutes into it, kind of everyone's body language relaxing, and I could tell that they were starting to have some fun with it. And about 45 minutes into the exercise, one of my new direct reports, he said, Shelly, I just have a question for you. I said, sure, Dave, what's that? He said, can I have another set of stationery cards? And so this was a raving success, and it set in motion just a whole different way of leading and a whole different focus on team development and recognition. And all I kept thinking about that entire working lunch was my grandmother, because growing up, she taught me the importance of please and thank you and following up with thank you notes. And it was not something people had done before. And what was fun for me is in the years that came, people would ask me for their personalized stationery around Christmas or leadership meetings. Are we getting some more of those cards, Shelly? Which kind of cards are we getting this year? And so it's just a small example of leaning into who you are. So there you have it. That's the essence of my leadership motto, be real. No doubt that my education and experience here at CSU played a huge and important role in who I am today, and it's great to be back, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you, and hopefully one or two of those lessons or stories will resonate with you and be something that was worthwhile. Thanks again. And I don't know if we have, I'm happy to stay for questions, but I think we might be kind of tight on time.
Yeah. If we have questions, we'd love to incorporate those. I know we are running a little bit behind, but we can always be flexible. So.
Maybe not. Maybe people. Oh, sure.
So I'm Indrakshi Ray. I'm a faculty here in the computer science department and also lead the cybersecurity center. So your talk was very inspirational. And I wish my students were here, to hear the talk from you. So I don't have a question for you, but I do have a request. Is it ever possible for you to come and give a talk to the students at CSU?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.